Hello and welcome to the Psychic Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Andrew Embling. Andrew is the director of Wellbeing, a community interest company that provides wellbeing support to local communities in the west of the UK. Andrew, how are you?
I'm very well, Matt. So thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Well, thank you very much for being here. We're looking forward to have a chat, to have an open and honest conversation about your mental health journey, to get some insight into not only your professional side, but the personal tools and techniques that have helped you and are available and accessible to other people. And by discussing your journey, we hope to share and normalise conversations about mental health, as often people are not alone in these experiences. Does that sound okay with you?
Absolutely perfect. Absolutely.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, a very easy first question for me is, would love to hear about your mental health journey.
Okay. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Even though today mental health is spoken of more openly and honestly, I got to if I reflect back to, I guess, my journey, it was definitely. So I've worked in industry, specifically in the world of telecoms and IT. And in my 30s, I had a period of time where I was off work with work-related stress, and the solution then that I was in the industry and I went to the doctor, I went on antidepressants, period of time away from the workplace, and then back in, and didn't look any deeper than that. And then I think I just learned to cope or manage. I don't know. I just got on with it, kind of stiff upper lip, just worked through it. Must be my something wrong with me. I don't know.
And in no way presuming your age, but back at the age of 30, was there a slightly different approach or view towards mental health at the time?
Yeah. So I'm in my 50s today. Yeah, I would say at that point, industry was very much kind of, there was a period of, make it fun, but it was kind of still high achieving, to kind of, rewards were, here's some merchandise. And don't get me wrong, I had a great place to work. And then it seemed to peter into more of that kind of goal orientated, results driven. And at that point, I think there must have been what I would kind of talk about today, a conflict in values, which at that point I wasn't aware of that. But yeah, I went back into the workplace, and I think I managed. I needed to earn a living, and I existed and I fulfilled my purpose. I did my work. I wouldn't say it was fulfilling. Perhaps got trapped, and I think then that came to a head approximately, oddly enough, maybe 10 years later, kind of in my 40s.
A long time.
Yeah. It came to a head again with I think a long period of decline in a slow decline into depression. Perhaps it's that slow that it maybe wasn't noticeable. It became a new normal.
And was this like in the context? So 10 years previously, you've been prescribed some medication. Did that persist, or did that start?
I managed to. I think so. For in that perspective, I do remember an interesting conversation. It didn't persist, but I can remember it at the time that I think I kept it up for maybe. I know it was maybe 8-9 months. But I think I went through a series of prescriptions, and the impacts on those prescriptions were various, from numbing to slowing and lethargic, which were interesting. And I think I eventually just came off them.
Yeah. So there's nothing you took that necessarily, it sounds like from how you describe it, there's nothing you took that was particularly useful.
Exactly. It was a band-aid, but I didn't know it at the time. And then again, and then again, say kind of in the 40s, my relationship broke down. And if I reflect upon it, things weren't healthy in me personally before that. But that was the catalyst for a huge change within me, and another journey of another journey I can remember of antidepressants as well, kind of. And the interesting thing with that is being more mature perhaps, and having a kind of different friend circle. And people started to suggest to me, why don't I think was worth saying is it got to a point in the workplace, I didn't realize how bad things had got, because I was using maybe coping mechanisms of, drinking too heavily. And at that point I was a newly appointed manager, and came into the workplace one day, and my team had a new manager.
Right.
I didn't realize things were that bad, but they were.
God, I'm so sorry. And also, like, that time when you're going through that relationship breakdown, like, they they do say that those breakdowns are are one of the most stressful things you can experience in life. And did it, during the aftermath of that, was it something that you were able to kind of take a step back and reflect on and then grow from there? Or was it something that was just very raw, very chaotic, very messy?
Interesting question, and I don't know if I have a definitive answer to it. I think it was messy from my perspective, because, and I think today, if I reflect upon it, today I have an awareness of perhaps being, for want of a word, neurodiverse. I'm dyslexic. And that's something I didn't necessarily know then. Again, I had coping strategies. It was, for me, kind of, there's always, sorry, no, it's not always. So for me, I know there was a persistent nagging of not understanding and wanting to seek answers to things that perhaps there weren't answers to. So that was, I guess, a very interesting situation to be in, where it's a very mental mind thing, very logical, process driven, and that in of itself was causing me issues. And I guess, and where I, what I was going to lead to a moment ago, is somebody within my kind of new friendship group was telling me, he said, why didn't I try Reiki? And it's like, well, what's this? For me, the most spiritual thing I would do at that point was go home and maybe watch a series of Most Haunted. Intriguing, loved it, but fascination, that was about it. So I did. And the interesting thing was, after one session of Reiki, I instantly stopped antidepressants. Now, I wouldn't recommend anybody do that, because I then subsequently had some real long periods of vertigo, dizziness, which I spoke to my doctor about, and they told me, Andrew, are you on your antidepressants? I said, no, I stopped them a week or so ago. And they said, maybe not a good move, Andrew.
Yeah, cold turkey is not a good approach.
So, and she said to me, how long has it been? And I said, well, it's been, I can't remember if I said it was a couple of weeks or a week. And she said, look, you're probably through the worst of it now. In fact, so, you've made that step. So, if you wait maybe one more week, then you're good. It's only going to subside from here.
And it's interesting. You talk about Reiki. You're not the first person that has that I've spoken about on our podcast about Reiki, and not particularly about Reiki, but something that's come up. And it's something that, if you talk about Reiki in kind of over a dinner conversation with maybe friends who necessarily aren't maybe attuned to maybe some wellbeing practices, it's often you're met with bemusement. I mean, what on earth is Reiki? And then you explain it to them, and then the response is even more bemusement. However, the more I speak to people, there are so many people out there that find it transformative. So I'd love to understand, perhaps from your perspective, what Reiki is, how it helped you, and what the feelings were that kind of really helped you improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and I think the answer to what is Reiki is, I think, depends who you speak to. I guess a generic definition would be that a Reiki practitioner is channeling universal energy. They're a conduit for energy through them to the person they're working with.
And at that time, what did you have a belief in this universal energy?
Absolutely not. Well, I think I was very open, and I think that was my gift, in as much as I have always been and still maintain today. I'm curious.
Yeah.
And I think so. I went in with a curious mind.
And willing to try, willing to experiment. But also willing to try based on the fact that you wanted to change. So
absolutely, I think that's an interesting point you make there about an intent to change, you know, a willingness to change. And I think, you know, intent, you know, is huge in anything, a modality that I tried and do today. And I think that's, and if I were to describe what Reiki is today, it's a Reiki practitioner. It's the intent they hold to create change in the person they're working with. That is the magic, I would say. And that is almost that's the energetic connection between them and their client, and and they are then the conduit for that intention, I feel. And it could be an open intention to simply allow the client to experience what's best for them.
Is it sort of the client's perspective, or the person who's been the Reiki being performed on or participated in? Is it a kind of a mutual process where everyone knows what the intention is, or is it something? Because I suppose intention, when you intend to do something, there's a real fire and power and belief in that, and from a, some may argue from a scientific perspective, a placebo effect that is really kind of urging you through. Whereas I suppose if you had some you have some hesitance about what you were doing, then there might be a blockage, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think you make a very good point there. And I think, as any practitioner, anything you do, I don't think you can be too precious about your modality and think that that's the solution to the results the person gets. I think, we just have to be, if the person gets the result they're after, and that's all, we should be attached to. And so, and I think today it's interesting because I work, I volunteer for a local cancer group called Charlie's, and I've been with them in my local area now for quite a number of years. And I go along there and I sit and I'll just chat with the people coming in, and they know that I offer Reiki, and I will wait for them. I will just say, hi, hey, I'm here. Just if anybody wants, you just let me know, and I'll, yeah, I'm interested. And some people have heard of it, are intrigued by it. I've never heard of it. But it's an opportunity, almost as a taster, a non-committal and safe way to try something. And when I work with people there, I will say to them, my intention is for you to just be more relaxed than you are right now. And so if that's, if somebody's come in completely new to the concept of working with energy, or any energy practice, that will be my explanation. I will always explain to them how I work, because some people will be kind of hands-on, hands-off, or certain points of contact, and obviously today we practice that in a very safe way. So I will always give an upfront explanation and empower that person to ask me any questions that they may have, and also explain to them that any point during the time that we're together to ask questions, because I think, for that person to feel safe, to feel empowered to do that, and to keep communicating with me is so important. But yeah, intention, I think, to create relaxation, and for them, if they're at ease, then they're going to be more relaxed and be more open to whatever they receive.
And do you find, as a practitioner, that you are that the rates of success that you see are high, or is it conditioned on, very similar to a therapeutic relationship where you are, you've both, the practitioner, the person who's come to see the practitioner has to be fully aligned, fully invested to be able to actually get any benefit out of it?
Interesting question.
Not like a massage, so to speak,
yeah,
or like a sports massage. It's different.
Absolutely. And I think I would say everybody is always, so if I set my intention openly with them to be more relaxed, then 100% outcome that they're going to be more relaxed. And I think, but it's an interesting point that you make about kind of that person. What am I thinking about here? What I'm specifically thinking about is if a person has an innate characteristic where they don't rest, where they're on the go all the time, or that they forget to invest time in themselves. It's interesting that when a Reiki session is over, that they almost feel that they have to then get up and rise and move back on with their day. They don't give themselves that time to kind of integrate the relaxation, to really connect and feel what this is like. So it's interesting that at the end of a Reiki session, you can actually tell so much more about the, I guess, the emotional challenges or the beliefs that person holds, which may be, you know, the subject for future sessions.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's interesting how, for example, carers are their innate way that they believe and function is to look after others first rather than themselves. And they forget their own identity sometimes and their own value. You know, the old adage of putting your oxygen mask on first. They're almost uncomfortable to be relaxed. So it's interesting when I meet people who are in that circumstance, that you know, I can make a mental note of that, and that the next time we work, we might spend a lot more time in that lead up to relaxing down, and I will set the intention with them to, okay, well, you know, when we finish, let's just take our time, just let's get used to this feeling of making some time for yourself and to fully integrate that relaxation.
And going back to, what was your experience, your personal experience, for when you were, you know, when you when you hadn't really heard about it? I'd love to hear about
yeah, and it's as simple as maybe what I've kind of shared there. It was, you know, I felt so deeply relaxed
for the first time in a long time.
The first time, yeah, it was almost, you know, a weight was removed that I didn't realize was in place, and almost maybe, you know, I'm looking in hindsight now, and perhaps I'm using terminology that I wouldn't have then, when I say perhaps it was, you know, a deeper relaxation and maybe a sense of balance, which restored, you know, a bit more harmony. For whatever reason, you know, I can't say exactly why. You know, I know it was a deep sense of relaxation, but literally from that one session, I stopped. Well, I stopped over drinking, and I stopped the antidepressants.
Could you I know you've explained that kind of, that weight, that balance. Do you think you could have explained why then, or did it almost feel like someone had just gone inside your head or your mind or your body or your soul and just realigned? And
yeah, and I think maybe it's a sense of ease, because if we imagine my actions of over drinking were ways of numbing a sense of pain, or they were a way of numbing without managing and facing the reality of the situation. So in whatever I experienced there, I think another way of perhaps was, as I say, is acceptance. It brought that sense of ease and acceptance. So when I say balance, perhaps it was an emotional balance as well, so that I was no longer, you know, puzzling in my head, was no longer busy. So the desire to, or the emotional challenges were less, and were not driving me to seek an external release or numbing.
And it's amazing when you do get that sense of acceptance or forgiveness for yourself. It can happen very dramatically. Like you said, it's happened. You suddenly accept something, and suddenly that weight lifts off you, or you've reframed something in your mind that leads to an acceptance or forgiveness of yourself, which means that you're not fighting against yourself anymore. And suddenly you are right. There is an ease, there is a relaxation, and that, you know, sometimes happens after, you know, after some time and building up a habit of doing it. But often there's a, you know, that, you know, the first kind of chunk really does, you know, really does lift that kind of, that weight off you. And I suppose it gives you that kind of, you feel buoyed with confidence and hope that actually, hold on, I can really change, and I can change for the better.
Absolutely. It's interesting. You know, you make a very interesting point, you know, because sometimes we are, I say sometimes because it depends upon our experiences, individual, where we're led to believe that change can take a long time, whereas that initial catalyst can be so quick sometimes.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was going to say, like, sorry to interrupt, but that long period, it's almost like we're kind of conditioned to think this is going to be really hard work.
Yeah,
but actually, sometimes it's not.
Exactly, and sometimes it, you know, it's, if the term too good to be true, and then, you know, if it happens, you know, some people will try and test it. I don't know, but yeah, and I think the interesting thing is, I had that that experience, and being a very curious person, you know, I think I had a couple of more sessions with it was two ladies who worked locally, and so they worked together in their treatments, but I then went on to train with them, which was it was amazing. It was an amazing journey. And the other thing what happened was, at that same time in the workplace, you know, because of the, I guess, the acceptance of and the, so I came with antidepressants, I stopped over drinking. There's a lot more balance and acceptance in the workplace, and me understanding the, you know, what had happened in the workplace. And I then went on a 3-day, something for myself, almost like a personal development 3-day program based down in Truro, and there were supposed to be, it was an open course, and it turns out that not many people had booked onto it. And when I arrived, it was only me actually there. There had been issues, so I had 3 days one-to-one with a lady called Claire. Claire, oh, it's going to annoy me now. I should have looked it up. And it was I didn't know at that time, but it was the 3 days. It was called, she'd called it a turnaround course, and it was all neuro-linguistic programming based.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about that at the time, but again, very very profound. Again, it was another piece of the jigsaw which really helped me. And I guess because I've worked in IT, I've worked, you know, that telecoms environment, it fitted my own kind of modality, because NLP is very logical in some respects. You know, it has some freedom around it, but it resonated with me, and again, it worked.
And it'd be interesting to understand. So NLP stands for neuro-linguistic programming, and from a sort of a popular culture point of view, if people haven't heard about it, they may have heard about it when they hear names like Derren Brown, and often a lot of, I think, dating books refer to about NLP. I'd be interested to hear it from a well-being perspective, what that is, because I've often found that the Derren Browns and the datings, it seems like they're kind of using it for entertainment or for personal gratification, which you know, some people don't, you know, think is right. But from a well-being perspective, actually, it has so much deeper roots.
Oh yeah, and I think its origins, and I'm going to put it out there when I say, you know, the origins as I understand them. You know, my interpretation of what's resonated for me is that NLP, you know, it's the study of why we do what we do, and you know, it's the language, it's the interpretation of and understanding the processes of, you know, how we're thinking. But you know, its origins are that they studied experts in their fields, and then they broke it down into its components. You know, they codicized it so that it could be taught again.
Yeah.
And in that deeper understanding, there was a deeper depth in the teaching and broaden it in some respects. So today, within the kind of therapeutic stance, it's used. So I work with so today, for the last 4 years, I've worked with a veterans charity, and it was three full days where it's all NLP based interventions. And these people are, you know, the people who come along, which are our veterans, serving personnel, and their families. They're taught these techniques and they experience them, but primarily they are ways of letting go of emotions. So if somebody today, and I think this is the best example to understand this, that if you ever come across a situation where you walk away from it and you say to yourself, I wish I'd said, or I wish I'd done instead of, and that's a great indicator that is telling you that it wasn't you interacting, it was your emotions interacting. So there are some great interventions, or some great techniques, some great tools, some teachings within NLP that help you release emotions from the past which are influencing you today. And that, I feel, that's such a big part of NLP that I see being practically used today. And I think the other thing the component of NLP is the listening skills. The listening skills, that when you are working with people, you hear what's not being said. Now, sometimes that's
Reading between the lines, so to speak.
yeah, absolutely. And and that doesn't mean you have to be somebody's trained in NLP to be able to do that, because that's an innate nature in an individual.
Yeah,
It just enables you to clarify when certain words are being used, to kind of maybe pick up on that so that you can dig a bit deeper.
and it's interesting. So and as you break down the kind of the word, the kind of the words involved, neuro linguistic programming. So it's looking at both intrinsic and extrinsic communication. So how we speak, how nonverbal cues, how we think, the emotions the words that we articulate our emotions, and like you said, from someone who is attuned and has kind of good active listening skills, they will be able to pick up maybe how someone is feeling as a result of what they're saying, or what they're not saying, so to speak. And like you said, when you hear things like the shoulds and the woulds, you realize, and people don't realize, but maybe other practitioner would realize, that there is something deeper going on, which would lead to someone who articulated that sentiment in that way.
Absolutely. Our behavior is a reflection of our values and beliefs, our internal programming, our experiences in childhood, the environment we're brought up within will indoctrinate within us the values, our core values of right and wrong, our beliefs, which again are learned through are experiential. And these things then through are the filters of how we perceive the world around us.
And it's funny, sometimes a lot of time people aren't aware of those filters. Like when you talk about the values, beliefs, there are a lot of people who wouldn't know what their beliefs are or their values are, but the way in which they operate, they are always one thing that seems to be mutually understood amongst neuroscientists, is that we do act through a set of values and beliefs, and some very complicated interactions in between, that lead to our behaviors in certain situations, or perhaps some erratic behavior in other situations, and which can be explained in the context of, like you said, childhood experiences, but things which actually are below the surface, a lot of people just don't even remember, couldn't articulate, or were not at a time in their life where they could speak, so they couldn't verbalize it.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. It really is fascinating, because if we talk about interventions where we're looking at how emotions, if we know when I say how emotions are influencing us today, then primarily, I'm not saying always, but primarily, we're looking at an incident that would have happened between the ages of 0 and 7. Really? If we're looking at a belief which is a belief that's hindering us, that's not a healthy belief, that's holding us back, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, something like this, that's happening unconsciously but is being shown through behavior, then that can be formed at any time in our life up to this point. It just would have been a message which is debilitating us, which is holding us back, delivered consistently with an emotion. And those combination, that consistency of delivery with an emotion, eventually the unconscious mind just gives up and accepts it, and it sinks in.
And actually, that's good. How you described it there, you can very easily see how that in the wrong hands could be exploitative.
Yes, and I think that that's, as you you quite rightly said, it depends upon our individual experiences. That some people will not have heard of NLP or neuro-linguistic programming. Other people will have through through Darren Brown, Paul McKenna, or within the therapeutic world. It comes up in many different guises, especially in self-help, especially in marketing. If you look in the marketing industry, it's there's lots of tools being used around linguistics in able to encourage or to learn people's behaviors, so that sales pitches are given in a way that people will listen. So people can have a very negative thought of NLP. And I think it's interesting that having an awareness that linguistics can be so powerful is almost the antidote to it, because it
Yeah.
slows you down so that you hear what people are saying to you. And it's like, what's the purpose of you telling me that?
Exactly, yeah. And often you do hear, and I think, you know, sales pitches, marketing pitches are a good example, where you hear things and you're like, that just didn't sound natural, or often didn't sound authentic. Because if there's something that often we can, I think a lot of people can pick up on, is when someone isn't being authentic. And that might be a very overused word, but it's, I find it's very obvious, and often you just want to say, look, cut the crap. Like, what are you actually saying? And you know, or internally, why are you framing it in this way? And like you said, you can take a step back and pause and go, okay, what is actually the agenda behind some of these words? But I think I'd probably like to focus maybe on the positive sides of NLP.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Because I think that's the point as well. It's like there's not, and not from, you know, just my experience, but you know, it is in popular culture as something that is seen as, you know, can be, you know, you could be cautious around. It could be exploitative, but actually in the right hands, and with the awareness and the kind of mutual understanding between client and practitioner, like you said, it can be very powerful. Now, I wonder, like, how I've always perceived CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is in some respect, is a reprogramming of thought patterns. Now, that might be a very, very simplified way of looking at it. In some respect, does NLP form part of that kind of framework, in terms of kind of reframing your inner talk, reframing the way that you're articulating things, or is it more about the understanding of the words that you use?
So I think first thing for me to say is, you know, I'm not a CBT practitioner.
Also, no, neither am I.
No. So in the answer I give, it's my understanding. So I would,
Yeah.
so my understanding, how I would see it, is that you know, cognitive behavior therapy is going to do a reframe, and it's a practiced reframe, so that it becomes a new habit.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, and then I would describe NLP as almost being able, you know, if delivered, it's a way of educating or empowering the client, the person you're working with, so that they actually understand the origins of why they're thinking the way they're thinking, because the root of this will potentially be, it's going to be in the unconscious mind. And so we will go back to the first cause, the root of where this has come from. And this is either going to be, you know, 0 to 7 for an emotion, or if it's a belief, you know, we're going to understand where it's come from. So I feel we're really picking that root out, which is going to empower that person with knowledge, with information and alternatives going forward. And it really gives a felt sense of change, with an explanation.
Yeah, and is that and again, I'm not a practitioner, but is that in some respects similar to when you're looking at kind of psychotherapy, when you're going back into the past to try to uncover some of these root causes? Or is this a approach that will, from another angle, look at the root causes of why maybe you're thinking or behaving in the way you do? And, you know, obviously I'm not, you know, I'm not asking you to compare and contrast all these things. I'm just trying to get an understanding, because it seems like, I think the one thing I'm struggling to think about or understand is, if you can pick up on these patterns that might point to something going on in the past, but let's say it's happened in an emotion between the ages of 0 and 7, then how on earth do you uncover that? Like, at that time, especially between, let's say,
absolutely. And you're asking that question, which is always comes up. And so if I talk about the, you know, the training we do within the veterans community and serving personnel and the families, there's a long lead up to before any practical work, and there's always a lead up of giving people the information they need to be able to take part in the practical aspect, and that is understanding to trust their unconscious mind, to not think about things, to almost give their excuse me, their felt instincts, their gut reaction, without thinking this.
Right.
So there's a lead up, an explanation. We talk about the conscious mind. We talk about the unconscious mind. We talk about how the unconscious mind is there to please and seek, and it wants repetition. So it's learned a way of acting and behaving, which at one point kept you safe. But it hasn't updated its program. So at one point it fitted, it created a solution that was useful and helpful.
But now it's out of
today
date.
it hasn't updated. It hasn't updated the program. So today it's limiting you. So we talk about the power of the unconscious mind a lot, and how we don't think to breathe. It just does it on its own. We don't go and say, could you heal that scratch or that scar? The body repairs itself. These things are happening outside of your conscious awareness. So we start talking about the felt sense, and we want to empower that person to be able to give us an instinctive answer to questions, which will identify and reveal a root cause in a first event. But it doesn't need to be right. It doesn't need to be completely the first answer. When working with the person, there's always rapport, so we'll know. We'll get an indicator if perhaps there's more. Do I push? Do I see if I can get a bit more information? Or we'll go with what's come up for them now. And during the intervention of itself, the answer or the solution will not be as profound as if it's not what we want it to be. Then that's another indicator to go a little bit further with it, and more answers come up, because it's like with anything. If first time you do it's unknown, and then when you do a certain intervention the first time, you get a bit more familiar with it and you trust it some more, and then you let go of that maybe initial unease and you start flowing with the process a lot more. The results become a lot more deeper.
And God, I've got a billion questions, but I'm going to try and whittle them down to 3. I think, if I can remember the 3 as you were talking. It's fascinating. Do you find, and specifically working with the veteran community, so I can see how. Okay, so first question: do you find that let's say the veteran community, or people who have served, are already trained to rely on that gut of that subconscious, in the face of danger, and then when that danger does happen, and an extremely traumatic event occurs for the human being involved, when they're at war, I assume that there's a lot of repressed memories or thoughts that would be extremely beneficial for that person, especially for coming out of a traumatic event, and not only in terms of veterans, but also for anyone going through any kind of post-traumatic issue or disorder. And I'll stop there. I'd love to hear about that, and then maybe I'll come on to something else.
I'll answer the question in an assumptive way, and I hope this is maybe kind of leading to what you're seeking. First of all, I would say it's interesting that within every one of us, there's an innate sense to, as you said earlier about language, to feel if something's right or wrong. And just basically, sometimes we just have to get comfortable and wake it back up. So is that indoctrinated? Is that programmed into somebody who's served more? Yes, depending upon their experiences, because they may, it literally can be life or death.
Yes.
And
so
over a period of time, so are you at that point more alert? And at the same time, anybody who's a parent will know that same innate says something else that comes awake and alight within having an awareness within them. So these things are innate within each and every one of us, but will come alive depending on our individual circumstance. So, and to answer maybe something I think you were asking, if we're talking about, if we just say, if we're working with trauma, anything which is trauma based, then we do not want to go anywhere near the traumatic incident, which has been the catalyst for what we are seeing today. Now there's lots of different explanations as to why. So it could be that you've got, say, X number of people who will go through the same incident, but only a small, or a percentage of them will come out traumatized. So there's some interesting thoughts as to why that happens.
Just to pause there, I'd love to hear the definition from your perspective of trauma, someone being traumatized, because that feels like if there's a specific segment of people who that has happened to, but it's a very, very profound and significant impact on their lives, isn't it?
So I guess, if, and I'm going to generalize here, if we talk about, there's an overwhelming emotion.
That's right. So it's overwhelming, yeah.
Overwhelming emotion to which the body perhaps shuts down as a way of defending itself.
Yeah.
Is one way of looking at it. So if we talk about that being the case, there's always if we talk about over and perhaps I realized I've not talked the name of the process we're talking about here. We're specifically I'm talking about a process called timeline therapy, which was put together by a gentleman called Tad James, who's only actually just recently passed away. So this process looks, if we looked at the emotion of anger, but when we talk about anger, we are emotional human beings. So the other point to make here is we're not making people emotionless.
Yeah.
We want them to be able to experience emotions as human beings and be resilient and empowered with those emotions, to notice them, so that we as humans are in charge and not the emotion taking over and being in charge of us.
Yeah, but at the same time, as humans, we are emotional. Like, everyone experiences anger, and it's not the goal to suppress that anger to a level, because actually in some respects anger's there because it is useful in some respects, but the kind of, like you said, the overwhelming feeling of anger and then the actions you take upon it, that is obviously things which are can cause real issues.
And you raise an interesting point before. Well, let me answer this correct, that make this statement first then. So we know that we will have incidents of anger throughout our life, and there may be something which is so large that it's the source of trauma. So if we're looking at taking out anger, and I'm specifically focusing on that, we want to know the first time you experienced it. And we talk about, because the first time you would have experienced any emotion, you wouldn't have known what it was. We don't. So I mean, depending who's listening to this, the audience is, I'm familiar with the phrase of anger, describing anger as spitting your dummy out or throwing your teddy out the pram.
Yeah.
So perhaps anecdotally, we can imagine that that's the first time we displayed anger.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. We had a podcast episode recently where someone was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress at the age of 18 months. Obviously, the person now is not 18 months. The person now is mid-20s. But going back to that point, I mean, when I first heard that, I was like, really? But actually, you can see as that brain starts to develop, if there is something really going on in that child's life at that point, not necessarily maybe external, maybe internally, injury, illness, whatever it is, then you can see how that could plant the seed of something that could really manifest itself at a later date.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I can't comment on that specifically. But we're looking for a first event within the timeline therapy process, and an event which will be potentially so insignificant that it actually doesn't carry the bigger, when you say, can you think of a time you're angry, you'll think about big events. But when we talk about the very first time, it's probably insignificant. You couldn't name it without us trusting an unconscious response as to when it was.
So is the assumption there then that for timeline therapy, that going back to the very first and understanding that, being aware of it, unpicking it, can have a transformative effect as you go back through your kind of memories and life?
Absolutely. And that's it, and so that I have to say that there's a lot of pre-talk in this, there's a lot of explanation in this, so that everybody's safe and knows what they're doing. But exactly that, it's basically what you learn from that first, we bring forward to today, and it enables it takes the energy away, so that we, you know,
Yeah,
we're not going to allow emotions from the past to influence today in an unconscious way. We might recognize them, but we have the opportunity to stop them, pause, and choose a different way of acting rather than reacting.
And it's interesting, the way you articulate that makes me go back to the earlier part of the episode talking about Reiki.
Oh yeah,
I mean, it seems actually something relatively similar, although I can imagine that timeline therapy, especially working in the veteran community, is probably a more intense experience than Reiki.
Yeah.
Or is that?
Well, yeah, I think, well, yeah, because I guess we're very overtly talking about something which can be very emotional, very heightened. So yeah, we have to go through, you know, there's, you know, and, you know, it's anybody, you know, it doesn't have to be a veterans community, because I say it's veterans serving and families.
Yes, of
you know,
course,
so anybody, you know, is experienced trauma will, you know, it's traumatic.
So in that case, right, so let's see if I understand this. So if someone's gone through a traumatic event, you don't go to that traumatic event. That makes sense. I get that. So does that mean then what you're trying to do is that if that traumatic event has led to an overwhelming feeling of something, then going back to the root cause of that feeling will then almost soften the impact of that traumatic event as that feeling flows through your memories?
So because we're working with the individual, we go through, so okay, there's a framework here, which is, you know, there's a defined framework that we follow, but the framework enables the individual to find their own answers. So, you know,
it's a facilitated approach.
So you're facilitating the individual to find their answers that empower them. And it is from that first time. And those answers that materialize will influence their behavior today. Now, as I was maybe hinting at earlier, it sometimes can be an iterative process. You know, there's a point, and this I guess this comes down to the skill of the individual and the rapport that you have with the person you're working with, because sometimes you have to be very firm in the instructions that you give, because it's almost done in a very relaxed environment, and it's almost I'm trying to think of the word. It's not hypnotic, but it's very relaxed, and the person will be doing it all in their minds. So you do have to be mindful of the sensory acuity, looking at the person to see how they're acting emotionally, because we don't want the person attached with emotions. We want them to be very much an observer, so that they can learn from this, but it's their learning. And it's when you work with one person, you work with one person, so you can't be too generic. Although, like I say, we've got this facilitated process, which has got, this is the way to do it, but the skill comes from allowing that person to make their discoveries, so that it's the learnings they get are for them.
And I think, like, so that's, I'm glad you brought that up around that kind of mindful approach as well, because it sounds like in a lot of both Reiki, both NLP, and also the timeline therapy, that actually there's some complementary things and exercises that people need to do in order to get full benefit out of these as well. And my assumption from what you said is that before the start of, let's say, a timeline therapy session, then there's going to be a process of, if someone isn't relaxed, of relaxation to allow them to access that or be mindful of their observed thoughts.
And that is very important, that we create the ability to create safe spaces. So whether that's through understanding how to relax, how to whether it's breathing, whether it's creating anchors to stimulate a relaxed state. But we want that person again to be empowered, and as practitioners, through the observing, if we know there's an abreaction to something, we want to be able to keep that person safe.
And I mean, in the interest of time, because my God, I could talk to you all day about this, but I'd love to understand. So outside of those kind of core the practice that you're a practitioner of, what are the complementary exercises? You say relaxation, meditation, mindfulness. I get the sense that might be some of the exercises, because it'd be interesting to hear from some of those kind of ways that people can start to embrace some of these therapies that they haven't heard of before.
So, sorry, let me just understand the question. What are the practices for kind of that relaxed state? Is that
well, just some other kind of exercises around that help them.
So it's interesting. Okay, so what I say, my journey took me through Reiki, but it then took me actually. So in there was that step to neuro-linguistic programming that I experienced, that I enjoyed, trained, and then there was a thing called emotional freedom technique, the tapping.
Ah, yes, yeah, I've heard
So
about that.
again, that was so beneficial for me. Again, it had me from a kind of a physical, emotional wreck, crying, to a laughing hyena within 10 minutes. So which was fast. So again, so the initial trilogy of skills that I learned were Reiki, NLP, and emotional freedom technique. So, and that has been my kind of cohort for working with individuals, and for a long time. And then interestingly, so what I would say, maybe 2 years ago now, no, sorry, no, yeah, 2 years, 18 months, mindfulness came along, and that was interesting, because as you quite rightly said, there are components of mindfulness in all that I was doing anyway. So it became a way of cementing and understanding what I was already doing, but adding more to it. So I mean, I just plant that thought, but then even more recently, and literally, yeah, very more recent, and this is a direction that's kind of coming into life now, is the concept of how all of those modalities can be implemented in one solution that I've experienced and will be kind of practicing very soon, and we're just putting it together right now, is Shinrin Yoku, forest bathing.
Yeah.
Because not only do we know that, the evidence base for just actually being in nature, we know that for a fact, and then if you combine that as a guided experience, one-to-one with somebody, then you have, and I guess another thing within in NLP we didn't mention about, NLP can be a great tool within there is storytelling, metaphors, so that you can create an awakening and thought within your client just by sharing stories, because again, it's a way of reframing, but it's a way of empowering the person to create their own solutions that are right for them. Now, if you think about doing that when you're doing forest bathing, you can journey through different landscapes that can facilitate a story. Then you can lead a person to somewhere in nature, through some structured exercises. They can sit in an observant way, maybe studying a stream perhaps, and it's interesting how through that observation, it's almost, there's a term within NLP we talk about, perception is projection. So what we perceive in the world around us is a projection of what's going on in our world, our mind. So from what they perceive in the world and nature around them can be important for them, but can also, if you give them through the journey to that point, the power to think about it and observe it, it can also present them with solutions and ways forward. And I can share with you something very specific about that. So in the training that I've undertaken recently, which was amazing because I could see how the world of NLP, the world of energy, of Reiki, the world of mindfulness all combined into this. So there was a moment that I was spending a time near a stream, observing the flow of water, and there were two channels of water because there was a rock in the way. Around one channel, it was blocked with leaves, and I had a stick and I was trying to clear it, and it was constantly blocking back up. And then the other channel was clear and flowing. And I suddenly thought to myself, why am I spending so much time to unblock this and fix it? When if I focused only where things were flowing and working, then it'd be so much easier. And in fact, the blockage, in fact, will compost then into something which is going to be even more fertilizing and beneficial later. Now, I could take that as anecdotal for what was going on in my world at that time, and it did, and that in of itself empowered me into kind of some challenges I was facing at the time. And another one, a quick story I can share about that is I'm passionate about what I do because I know how it changed me. So sometimes I want to give too much information when I'm working with groups, especially, you know, groups, you want to give them everything, but sometimes you just need to plant a seed and allow the people to find their own realization of that seed. And that's something that came to me during that training as well. I could see how that played out from an observation of a small seed planted, actually, and I could see how around it were different stages of growth. So all I need to do is plant seeds, and how it materializes and grow will depend upon, you know, how we I guess the extra nourishment we give the person. We just need to create this safe space for them to grow that seed of awareness in.
And like you said, like go back to your first story around, sitting observing the stream, like that's something which you combined all of the skills that you've taken to date. And like you said, a lot of the skills, maybe the mindfulness or the awareness of yourself, is not necessarily something. Yes, you've gone through a therapeutic process, but it's you've been able to get that yourself by being through a facilitated approach. But in essence, it was free, right? Like it was you thinking about, you're not taking a pill, you're not relying on in necessarily a service, but then being able to articulate, both verbally, as you've done today now, but in your thoughts back when you were looking at the stream, actually this could relate to something in my life, and that bringing some form of comfort and relief is amazing, right? Like that's something, and it's something that all of us can do and do more of if we make the time for it.
Yeah, and I think this is why it's so important. We know the evidence base from being in nature. We know what it does to our cells. We know. And then it's, the combination of that healthy environment, and then it combined with a held space of storytelling and facilitating, and just creating that safe space, leading up to that point where you allow the person to experience what they experience, is so powerful. I literally saw all those modalities coming together. The energy work, the linguistics work, and the mindfulness, all came together within that forest environment.
Yeah, and I think that this is some of the realization that I've come with, that a lot of these different therapies and approaches, they come together because you're working on your own mind. You're not working on another person's mind. You're working on your own mind, and you realize that you've got these tools and tips and strategies that can not attack the problem, but can help the problem, support the problem from lots of different angles. But fundamentally, they're supporting the same problem. And that's when they can all start to come together. And the more practice you have in that means that in future situations where you might have a traumatic event or a crisis, because we all do, right? Like, everyone has, everyone has bad times, bad days. Having that toolkit where you can proactively say, okay, right, I'm going through this at the moment, but I know to mitigate this, I can use X, Y, and Z, or at least try X, Y, and Z in this combination, and this might work. If it doesn't, I'll try another combination. But it's that, like you say, your curiosity enabled you to do that.
Absolutely. And I think, you make a great point there, that today there are so many modalities out there of creating change. It's important that any individual has the opportunity to try them and empowered enough to say, no, this isn't for me.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
because I think the important bit is to kind of draw upon another thing what you said there, is that ultimately every one of these modalities is wanting to identify where the person, where what's the root cause. Is it, where did you suddenly feel unsafe or out of control, and enable the person to kind of come forward to today without the baggage of yesterday. Everybody will come about it in a different way, but we want to create empowering change for the individual. So it's important we empower people to basically say yes, and to say, I'm curious, but not today. I want to be curious about something else to see if that feels right for me.
Well, Andrew, honestly, I could talk to you all day, but thank you for a fascinating and insightful conversation. I think going into this, going into our chat, I know we've chatted previously, we've covered Reiki, NLP, timeline therapy, emotional freedom technique, and Shinrin Yoku. These are, we could probably have an episode on each, but actually I think what's valuable is hearing how your experimentation and also not experimentation, but your kind of deep learning as you are a practitioner of a lot of these therapeutic techniques enabled you to bring these together to form something that really works for you. So honestly, thank you so much for sharing like both your personal story and and how it's worked professionally for you as well.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just search for Sidekick Community or Sidekick Stories and we'll pop up. And please do give us a rating if you like the show. And do check out our free Sidekick app for iPhone and iPad, a collection of interactive exercises, tools and tips to help you boost your mental well-being. As we discussed in this episode, the app enables you to build a personalized well-being toolkit to help you deal with life's ups and downs. Just go to our website, www.sidekick.org.uk and click the download now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Andrew, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Matt.